So I think just to kick us off, I'd like to introduce our two speakers that have really kindly agreed to come and chat to us this afternoon. So it's Alex Byers from Glasgow Life. Perhaps Alex can wave if we can actually see you. You Mark, there's Alex. And Melanie Farrow from Maryhill Borough Halls. Can you wave as well, Melanie, wherever you are? It'll depend on which screen everybody's on, but once they start talking, you should actually be able to see them. And I have to say, they both wanted me to emphasise that they're not saying that they're absolute experts on this by any manner of means. We asked them if they'd come and chat to us all today because they happen to be a bit further along in this journey of opening up buildings and preparing spaces and so on. So that's the basis that we're having the chat today. I have to say, I haven't done one of these before when we do it as a chat. I think we had a little bit of a practice, the three of us last week, and it seemed to work quite well. So I think without any more waiting around, it would be good to start the conversation. So if I could ask Alex and Melanie just to sort of introduce themselves just very briefly so that you know what the context is of where they're starting and where they're at. If I can start with Alex.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
So hi, afternoon everyone, and thanks for coming along. As Sally said, by no manner of means would I consider myself an expert. But what I would say is that because we've been looking to open buildings, we've had to work through a process. And so I suppose that's part of what we wanted to share today. Just in terms of background, so I manage the community facilities and community libraries for the city. So that's roughly around 50 buildings, and while not all 50 are opening just now, we are going through a process of a phased opening. And so right now we've got something like 8 community facilities just about to open, and we've got another 10 libraries opening. So as part of having to work through how to do that, then we've had to come up with, we've had to work through our risk assessments, and we've had to work through our recovery plans. And so some of that experience was what I intended to share today with you. Is that enough, Sally, as an intro?
Yep, that's okay, grand, thank you. Lovely. Melanie, can you, I'm not sure you'll be able to unmute yourself. I'm just trying to find you.
Unmuted, hopefully.
Oh yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, we can, good, thank you.
Hi everyone, and thanks for coming along. As Alex said, I didn't really expect as many people with it being such nice weather, so thanks for bearing with us. And again, I'm not an expert, so just taking you through where we've got to so far. So we're Maryhill Borough Halls Trust. We have an old Victorian building, a community organisation up in the northwest of Glasgow. So we are not open yet. We're looking to probably open in the beginning of September. And we've got a bit of a schedule behind that, but we can maybe talk about that later on, about how those processes I'll go through. But as Alex has said, we've gone through the risk assessments, recovery plans, and no matter what size of your organisation or whether you've got a building or not, it is the same sort of things that you're going to have to look at. So whether that's for your staff and volunteers, if you've got tenants, if you've got communal spaces, if you've got hirers or regular groups, there's going to be something that is going to be pertinent to all of you. And I'm seeing this really as like moving back into a new building. So that's my background. I've set up various arts organisations, new builds, new visitor attractions, etc. So I'm really treating it the same way as I would with going back and starting from scratch, although you don't have to start from scratch. It's about adapting risk assessments, etc. as well. So I think that's probably about as much as you probably need just now.
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. Well, we've got a host of topics that I thought we could actually hope to cover. I'll just give you a quick, if I can, just show you the sorts of topics that I think we might manage to cover this afternoon, and then we'll get into some of the key topics. Can you, hopefully you can see a PowerPoint at this point on the screen. So just some of the types of things that we'll hope to get to in the conversation. So bits around the planning that Melanie and Alex have got on with. Certainly lots of the detail about what they've done more specifically about buildings and purchasing PPE. Maybe something about tenants, users, staff, the people involved. I know that's quite an important thing. And then something about gathering information and resources. So that's the type of topics that we're hoping to cover with that this afternoon. So could I kick us off then? Melanie, could you say something a bit about what you've done around planning, what you were going to do for this?
So we've really looked at the guidance that the government has given, and I think it's really important to take into account the fact that the guidance from down in England and obviously Wales, etc., is going to be different than the guidance up in Scotland. So it's really important that you keep an eye on the guidelines coming through from the Scottish Government. And I'm sure that there's probably somewhere we can put a link in so that you can see where you can find that. And then it's not just about, I would say, looking at the government, the guidelines that are relevant to your organisation or what you think you might do. It's quite good to take a look at other areas. So, for example, I'm part of North West Glasgow Voluntary Sector Network Group, and we've had a Spaces and a Procedures and Policies group working on these sorts of things. And someone provided information from the sport background, which was actually a really good checklist. So something that's been really useful is actually just taking some look at the guidelines that might not be relevant to you, but you might be able to pull things from. We've also done a risk assessment, and quite a lot of the time for your health and safety, you should just be adapting your risk assessments that you've already got. A word of warning, if someone else has got a COVID risk assessment, don't automatically assume that you just use the same one. You really need to take a look at what is relevant to your organisation and adapt it and develop it. The Health and Safety Executive have got a really good risk assessment online, and if you go onto their website, they've got a lot of really useful information if you want that as a start point. We've also developed some building guidelines which will be issued to all our tenants. We have developed obviously new working policies for our staff and volunteers. And we will be adding some extra documentation to those that hire our spaces. So as part of the terms and conditions, we'll be putting a clause in that they need to sign up to our building guidelines. And we'll also be asking them to provide their own risk assessment as well. The same with the tenants, we're asking them for their risk assessments as well as signing up to the building guidelines. And within that, I think you need to look as well at things like we've got an orchestra that rehearses that has storage space within the premises, so they will need to take into account how they are going to access that, how they are going to keep those high touch points clean. And I think that's really the main thing. I am not finished yet. I'm finalising my hopefully guidelines next week, but that is the problem at the moment. There is a lot of information and you do have to keep revising it and looking at it. And we've got a week where we're going to bring in our staff and our volunteers and do training with them, and then we're going to have a week of working to that before we actually even try and open to the public, because with all the will in the world, what we want to put in place or what we might want to put in place might not actually work in practice. So it really is about, I think, just taking your time with it. Don't feel rushed or pressurized to have things. And everyone's in the same boat. I'm sure that Alex will agree with me. No one's been in this situation before. So we only have to work with what we've got, and it might not be right in the first instance, but you as long as you're working on it and you keep revising it, and just make sure that you've got things are either dated or you've got a different reference number so you know which set of guidelines that you're currently at. I think that's okay. It. I don't want to go on too long.
Goodness me, that was quite a lot of the planning side of it. What about from yourself, Alex? What sort of things have you done around planning?
Okay, so I think similar to Melanie, I think what we tried to do was work our way back. So we were basically saying, when would we want to open? When do we think we're realistic based on the guidance that's been issued? We tried to plan on when we thought that we would be allowed to open. And then it was working it back from when you think that you can do it as to what all the steps that you need to put in. And when you started to build up all of those steps, you might have to change those timelines that you had originally planned in. I think what's clear is that the guidance and the understanding of the guidance is really, really important, both for you and for any of your tenants or users, because it is changing. And there are different expectations out there. So people might be expecting, for example, right now, that you would be able to open your office. But what we know even from yesterday is that we're saying, well, actually non-essential offices should not be getting open. So sometimes what people think is to happen isn't what's actually happening. So we actually need to make sure that we are in line with the guidance, even if we're trying to plan ahead. So you need to be able to respond to any changes that are coming up. I think as well, Melanie's mentioned that there's more than one set of guidance. So you have got the route map, but actually different sectors have their own guidance. And so it's always useful to be able to look at that. And certainly from our perspective, because there was a number of childcare organisations that we would have been looking to open the buildings with the childcare in, then actually we also checked that guidance so that we knew and understood what they would be looking for. So there's that element of understanding the wider picture where you can. And so I think that that's important as well. So the guidance is a key element of the planning, and keeping abreast of that and understanding that is really, really important. The issue of masks, again, another example of what does that mean for you now? And also the social distancing is a huge issue for all of us, because actually your planning is based on a number of assumptions. So right now your planning is based on the 2 meters, your planning, so it's those kind of things that if that changes, that's a fundamental change to the way in which you could deliver your services. Also, I think that when you're looking at some of your groundwork, you really need to think about what is it that you can actually do now based on those assumptions. So for example, when you look at your buildings now, then you would need to look at the capacity. So what's the capacity of the buildings now and the rooms in your buildings now, as opposed to when you previously would have been operating? So if I use examples, in some of our buildings, we will have lesser halls and we'll have large halls. And you're talking about, for a lesser hall, you might have been able to get 60 in it before. Now you're probably getting 12. Some of your larger halls, you'll get 250 in it. Just now, you're probably lucky to get 40. Your committee rooms, you're probably talking about 3 rather than 12. So you will need to look at, and as part of the planning ahead, thinking about the capacity in each of your rooms and what it was then, what it is now, and potentially what that could be in phase 4 if some of these restrictions are moved. So that helps you to think about your planning just now and your planning as you move forward. And I suppose that's another part for us, is about the flexibility of your planning. The other is that we've had to build in timescales for equipment, for so whether that's your PPE, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but your PPE, your signage, those kind of things. So you would start to think about, and that's why I suppose I'm saying work your way back from your proposed date, so that you've got time to make sure that your timeline's right. And the other part of your planning is about speaking to your tenants and trying to get feedback from them as to what they think their plans are. Because while we're all working on this, some of them might have been thinking about coming back, but actually the guidance isn't there. Or some of them might be saying, you know what, I'll be working from home until September, October, so don't worry about me. So it's useful to get some information so that that helps you to shape some of your plans. And then the other part of it is about whether your workforce and your volunteers, etc., because it may well be that this situation changes how they view things. So what is the position on that? Because particularly for volunteers, you might have to think about whether they would be still able to do the things they could do before. Now, shielding is obviously just changing, but actually they might still be a bit nervous about coming in, and we'll be talking about staff, etc. later on. But these are all the kind of elements that you need to think when you're starting to do your planning. The last bit I would say as well is just around the building, and that is about the building itself and knowing that you're able to open. So have you done all your water checks and those different things that need to be done in order to make sure that you're safe when you open your doors? And I'll stop there and let Melanie back in.
All right, thank you. I was actually, I'm not sure which of you wants to speak about that, but I think that's really interesting. I know I picked up when I was speaking to the two folks before that the whole iteration thing is, and I think that came out from what they were both saying. You can't say, right, I've done that and it's fixed. It was an iteration and it has to keep going.
Yeah.
And I think we started to talk, Alex, about the buildings now. And I think this is a huge bit of where there's been publicity around all of this. What do I do around signage, routes, cleaning, all of those sorts of things? So I'm sure there's quite a lot there that people would be interested to know. What have you done and what have you thought about in terms of the actual setup of the buildings? So I don't know which of you, Alex or Melanie, I'm not sure which of you wants to talk about that one first.
I don't mind.
Go on then, Melanie, you go next. Let Alex have a break. So about
we're smaller buildings. We're a smaller one building. So what we've done so far is we have put in a one-way system. So something to think about if you're putting in a one-way system is congestion points. So again, as Alex is saying, you need to have the conversations with your tenants or users to ensure that you're not going to have congestion points where there's not going to be enough space to have distancing. So that's maybe people having a conversation about staggering opening hours, staggering your groups that they come in, and then you've got to think about if you've got groups and users coming in about clean down in between users, and again the numbers might not be feasible in the spaces that were there before with your distancing. We have not actually got signage that has got a specific distance on it, purely for the fact that the cost of buying numbered distance signs with specific distances on will then be horrendously expensive to have to keep replacing them. So the best thing to do, not the best thing, I won't say the best thing, what we are doing is we are getting signs that say please adhere to our social distancing, and at the front doors putting a sign up to say we are adhering to, and then putting the meterage there, or whatever feet or whatever that is going to be. With regards to things like we've got sneeze guards at reception. So some you can just buy off the shelf, but we've got a specific height of dropped area for disabled access, and that has had to have a bespoke part made. The signage and way marking, it's entirely up to you how you do that, whatever fits best for your building. We will be putting out information to our tenants to instigate the one-way system on stairs, etc. Your lifts, you're probably going, depending on the size, I mean, Glasgow Life might have bigger lifts than we do with nice big goods lift, etc. We've got one very small passenger lift, so that means one person in at a time, unless it's someone that's maybe got a disability that needs a carer, etc. with them. And we have stipulated that the priority will be for those with disability and mobility problems. I'm trying to think what else. We've got sanitisation units at all the high touch points. So kind of going into the PPE at the moment, equipment. I'm trying to think what else there is. And we've got barriers. I've just got barriers arrived. So the thing to watch out for, and I think we'd had a discussion with when we spoke about this, is ensure you know who you're buying from. There's a lot of people that are buying things off the internet, just quickly buying things, seeing there's a quick lead-in time on it, and just buying it, and it's not actually the product that they're wanting, needing, or there's actually not even a product in existence. So please check that who you're buying from and where you're getting it from. I got my sanitisation units, the wall-mounted ones, from a hand drying company that are actually reporting all their hand drying units to hand sanitisers, and I actually had the conversation with them, so I knew that they were actually a real company. So just to stop anyone getting ripped off online, because it has been happening to people, unfortunately. I think there is a document I think that we're going to show later on as well. We've been working with an organisation called Embed, who have been looking at all the ways of how the new operation of buildings is going to work, and new guidelines across the UK and for those with disability access. So there's a really good document there that summarises a lot of the guidelines, but how it might affect those with various disabilities. And something that we are not going to do is use face masks. We're going to use visors so that people can still see people's faces to read, etc. Also, it's not as intimidating for maybe those that maybe have autism or other similar disabilities that might find it quite intimidating to face someone with a mask. Those at the front desk that are behind a screen will be okay. And I'm trying to think if there's any other signage that we've got. So far, we've not got any. The signage has all just arrived. So again, we'll be going around the building to put that up and see how that works. If it needs to change, it'll need to change. As we've already said, everything is changing all the time. But yeah, the important thing is to check on congestion points, and also on your numbers that you can safely have in each of your rooms and each of your buildings, and also when you've got crossover in groups. So you might need to schedule groups differently, especially if you need to do a clean down in between different user groups being in and out of the building. You might need to stagger start times. So say you've got a lot of maybe after school clubs, etc. They might need to be staggered rather than being all at the one point. We are quite lucky in the fact we can only have one group in at a time anyway, so that's not going to be a problem for us. Maybe Alex can talk further about it.
Lovely. I think, what about the cleaning side of it? I think that was something else you'd spoken a bit about, wasn't it? Plans for how different areas get cleaned in the buildings and so on.
Yeah, so we are now unfortunately going to have a cleaner on. Well, not unfortunately, we will have to have a cleaner on site. So we've had to go to find funding to be able to fund that, because of the numbers of toilets, etc., and the number of high touch points. So again, it's about identifying your high touch points. So door plates, etc. We've got sanitisation units outside our toilets, so that people can sanitise their hands before they touch a door and go in. They can wash their hands and then come back out and then sanitise their hands again when they've touched another door. So there'll be sanitisation points as you come in the building, as you leave the building, and at the lift and stair access points. So there are a lot of sanitisation units all over the building. Cleaning, yeah, we are looking at investing in a fogging machine. So this is to clean down your spaces or your building either between groups, or if should you have someone that is identified as having carried infection on site, and you can either, there's the option of buying one of these machines or getting an organisation in that can do it for you. If you've only got smaller rooms that you've got smaller groups in, you might be able to bring in your own cleaning regimes with that, but again, you've got a variety of risk assessments that you'll need to do, and obviously some people might need various types of PPE for that. The PPE, just on that fact, I was on an infection control course on Wednesday with Gary. I think that's where we saw each other, and we were learning about things like gloves and how to. Would you believe there's actually a way to put gloves on and off properly? So I would actually really recommend doing something like that, because then you can then pass that on to staff and volunteers if anyone is actually doing any cleaning, and also about how to put on a mask and take it off safely without getting infection onto your hands, etc. So okay. I think that's about it. Sorry.
Yeah, lovely. No, that's great, Melanie. Thank you. If anybody's got anyone in their family or friend circle that's a medic, you'll know about the taking on and off gloves. They get very excited if folk don't do it properly. So it's a useful thing to know. Alex, I'm sure you've got things you'd like to add about the buildings and what you've done with your buildings.
I suppose lots of similarities, and I think that's the important thing here, is that all of us will have these similarities. In terms of the way that we approached it, we kind of created two different documents. We created a risk assessment and we created a venue recovery plan. And the idea behind that was that we were very clear on the risks and how we would mitigate those risks, and they would be recorded and you would understand that. And also for the staff and from a Glasgow Life perspective, we also have trade unions, and the trade unions for every building that we open, then we've got health and safety trade union representatives that would go around the building to make sure that it was safe for staff to return. So we've got those two documents that we've signed off, if you like. And then I suppose in order to do all of this, we really started off with a walk round, understanding what we talked, both Melanie and myself talked about earlier, about the guidance, about understanding all of that. We started off with a walk round, and that was starting to identify those kind of pinch points that Melanie mentioned in the corridors, on the stairwell, those kind of things where you were saying, okay, that doesn't mean that that part of the building's not accessible. It just means you need to understand how you're going to manage that. So, you know, is there a one-way system? How will the traffic flow in terms of the customer, but also in terms of the staff? So those kind of the journey, if you like, of how you use your building should be set out. And that means that people know which way they're going. And I think we're all starting to get familiar with some of this in the shops and different things. So it's not 100% new now, but I suppose when we're starting to think about it, it was. So you've got all of the kind of the walking around the building, the understanding the capacities, the signage. So you would then look at your signage overlay. Where are you putting your signs up? Can you make them yourself? Because again, you're trying to minimise the cost. So if you can, and you're very creative, for Glasgow Life, it's harder to do that because there's always the whole corporate thing that goes on about all of our buildings. But actually, it could be, you can make them really quite fun and interesting. So it'd be about minimising those costs, and some interesting ones I'd like to go around and see. And then you've got your kind of PPE, so you might have some screens up. Masks is an interesting one because obviously, you know, in terms of retail and etc., we're now obliged to wear masks, and certainly in libraries, then it is seen to be mandatory to be wearing masks. And so you can start to see that there's an expectation, I think, for people. But we do know that certainly for staff, they might feel that they're uncomfortable wearing a mask all day. And so certainly we are looking at visors, and that's more likely, although behind the scenes that might not necessarily be the case. So there's still some discussion around it. Interestingly, I was in Boots last week, and the girls in Boots were wearing masks rather than visors because they said it made them sweat. So it's just interesting that what you think might be a solution. We got feedback from some of the libraries that have opened in other parts of the country who have advised that wearing the visor is seen as less of a barrier, even for people that don't have any issues. So actually people seeing your face again, being able to see you was much more welcoming. So if you want to remove barriers, you'll need to think about those things. So the overlay in terms of the building, looking at the cleaning regime, and crucially who's responsible for that, because you're looking at, none of us can afford to have constant cleaners coming in and doing stuff. That probably isn't possible in the longer term. So part of this would be about deciding in terms of the staff or volunteers, making sure there's procedures that they clean their own workstation, for example, they make sure there's clean desk policies, those kind of things that just keep everything right. But then if there's other users, so if you've got a tenant in, so for example, if we've got our childcare organisations, then it's their responsibility to do the additional cleaning within their area. So there might be, so you would need to have a discussion about what's your responsibilities and what are the responsibilities of your leaseholder or your tenant. So there's some of that stuff that you would want to go through. And so that's a number of the elements. Then you're talking about other aspects of this, about how you're organising the building. So you need to think as well about that containment control, where you're looking at what if somebody presents and says, I feel ill just now, where do they go? And so you should look for a designated area and make sure that you've got a process in place to remove that person from the building, make sure where they have been is completely closed down, is cleaned and closed down, and you maybe have to close down your building, and make those alternative arrangements for a full clean before you're able to reopen again. So there is elements about that containment part of it that you would want to put in as part of your procedures. And there's some other things that you need to think about, like first aid. So you'll need to change your first aid box so that you make sure you've got extra masks and different things in, but also some of your procedures. So how do people feel about, you know, having to deal with someone? So there's some procedural aspects of the first aid that you might want to think about. So these are, I suppose, some of the key parts. The other bit is the staff. And I think Melanie had mentioned that you might want to look at staggering things. So certainly from a Glasgow Life perspective, we've made some adjustments to the opening hours at this point in time. And the way that the staff, normally we would have had a handover period, but actually we've changed our setup so that we've changed the model in the interim. So normally in community facilities I have one person on, but we've got two on, so we're doing a kind of team approach so that we know that there's less crossover. So we've got teams of two, but also that they're in a half an hour before the building opens to make sure everything, and a half an hour after to do more of the cleaning and the tidy up. So there are parts that you might want to think about in terms of your staff hours, your volunteer hours, and if there's more, we're opening the community facilities just now for the childcare providers. Therefore, those hours are based on their needs. Whereas in libraries, we've made a different flexibility around some of that, making sure we've got an evening, etc. But actually, the opening hours are different, and that's to avoid the peak traffic and those kind of things. So we've actually tried to think about what it's like to get to work, what it's like to come back from work. How do we minimise? Because we need to keep reminding ourselves, and at times it sounds daft, but you do, is that we're not going back to normal. So putting all of these things in is actually really useful. Melanie mentioned about staff training, and certainly before we do any of this, then our staff go through a COVID training, but we do walk rounds beforehand so that people can see it live, so that they go around the building before it's open, they understand the layout, the flow, all of those types of things. The same with our tenants. The tenants should go round the building to understand and make sure that they then take account of all of that when they're doing their own risk assessment. So that means that everybody's familiar before we open the doors. And that means that you're starting to think then people have got that stuff in their head, and they're starting to add to their expertise on how we'll go about this. And I think after that, it will be about ongoing communication. What I would say is toilets are a bit of a difficulty at times. And certainly if you've got more than one toilet, it's a bit better, because you can then maybe decide that the staff use one toilet, the users use another toilet. People might need to agree to clean down like the doorknobs, etc., and the handle after use. But you can't really expect people to start cleaning a toilet. So toilets become quite a difficult one. And certainly public toilets is a bit of is still a bit of a challenge. But I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you for that. That was quite good. That moved us on quite neatly to talking about staff and volunteers. So Melanie, I don't know, was there anything you wanted to add about PPE or about working with your staff and volunteers?
Just on the staff and volunteers, exactly as Alex was saying, we're going to send the guidelines out at first and get some feedback just to see if everyone understands them. Then once we're on site, we'll do the same thing, do a walkthrough. But something else we're doing not only for our volunteers is actually we're going to do a small, I think I spoke to Karen about this the other day, do a small video to put onto our website, so that not only our tenants, but our tenants' visitors and our visitors and anyone that's interested will be able to see what measures we put in place. So basically a walkthrough of what you will experience, I suppose, when you walk through the front doors, so that it isn't challenging and it isn't scary, and so you can actually see what people are going to look like, whether if they've got mask visors, or what the reception now looks like with a big plastic screen on it, etc. So and then to go through things like, these stairs can be up or down, these ones will be up, these ones will be down, here's the lift, what's what you're going to see. And I think, and obviously our event spaces as well, so we'll put them in and show what they're going to look like and what measures we've got in place within those spaces as well. And the signage, so people are not confused by signage. I used to work in theatres, and we were in a venue where we had the same thing for 15 years. And the whole time that I was there, I wasn't there for 15 years, but we were there for 2 years, and we tried a number of different things to get people to move around the building in different ways with different signage. And people don't really want to read signs, they just want to be directed. So we're going to try and work out and see how that goes. But again, it's this revising and looking at things, and once we start operating, we'll find out exactly, I think, how they are working and how they're not working, and we'll just need to adapt as we go through. And as Alex says, as the guidelines change, we're going to have to change that with it, so that we might not need to have such a big distance between people. I know that we do events, and the events industry are really pushing to bring everything down to 1 metre or less, depending on what type of environment it is. So that's why we've not gone with the signage at the front. And as Alex said, it's a brilliant way to, there's lots and lots of really good and different ways of making signage maybe actually work, so people are noticing it. So yeah, I'll be really, really pleased to see if anyone's got any exciting ways of doing that as well.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure folk will want to see your video, so I popped in there that we'd share your video. I'm sure you'd be happy to share the link to your video.
We've not done it yet, so it'll be done once we've got everything in place, so maybe in 2 or 3 weeks time. So maybe as more people are coming I think it's going to be done yeah, 2 or 3 weeks time. We're going to do it then, hopefully, when everything's in place and everything's arrived. And that's maybe something just to say, that please be aware as well with a lot of things that you might order. I had things that were due to arrive for the end of June, and they've just arrived today, basically the end of July. So some of the things do have quite a long lead-in time depending on what you're ordering. So just to be aware of that when you're doing your planning for reopening, that you might make plans to be open by a certain date, but if you don't have the things in place, that you might need to reschedule that.
Okay, thank you. We're doing really well with the time here. I can see, can I just ask folk if you do have any questions to put them in the contact, and we'll have a couple of moments shortly to ask Alex and Melanie if there are any questions. So if you've got any, put them in the chat, please. And just, I suppose, getting towards the end, really, folks, of our chat, how are you dealing with the whole data side? And folk might realise they've got to gather names and addresses and be worrying about GDPR and all that sort of thing. So how have you handled that side of it? Can I start with yourself, Melanie?
So we are currently working with an organisation called Scottish Tech Army to help us with revising our data strategy, and we are looking at the GDPR element as part of that. So there is guidance on, and there's a great suite of documents on the Scottish Government website. I don't know if we've got that one, because that only came out sort of in the last week or so, and that's actually got things like posters, etc., of the information that you need to take and how you hold it and how long for. And again, it is about having a discussion with tenants and anyone using your spaces. So any of your groups that are using spaces, or if you're a group going into someone else's space, you will probably be asked to be able to have all the details of those in your group. So what we are going to do is make sure that that onus is on either the hirer, the tenant, for any visitors to have their details, and we will take the details of the visitors to the trust itself. You will also need to, I think that there's a minimum requirement of what is needed. It's not up to us to police it, so it's not up to the organisation to not let someone in because they haven't provided the details. It is up to you to just do your best that you can, and certainly I'm not going to put staff or volunteers at risk of a situation because someone maybe wants to come in and use the toilet and they won't give their information. And also just to be aware that not everyone gives accurate information. So I know of someone that has a pub that has 50% of the information that has been supplied on the Trace and Protect is not accurate. So again, that is not up to you to police. It is just the fact that you need to take the details from someone. So whether it's the accurate details or not, that's the unfortunate thing. But yeah, that's and we, I think, are going to probably put that on a spreadsheet, just a very simple spreadsheet. We're going to have the signs up to say why we're doing it and how long it's going to be held for, and it's only going to be used for those purposes. So the main thing is just to say that you're not obviously going to use it as marketing or sending it on to anybody or selling it on to anybody, a bit like what you should have with your general GDPR anyway.
Okay, lovely, thank you. I don't know, Alex, have you got anything to add about the data and the handling?
Yeah, I would probably remind people, so I think there's a couple of things. As you're moving on, the chances are that you will be opening your buildings for particular groups rather than just for everybody. And so it should allow whoever is the let holder or the leaseholder to be able to take notes. So for example, in terms of community facilities just now for us, then the childcare organisation knows all the families that are coming in. The drop-off is outside, so that minimises the amount of people coming in the actual door, and they have all the details. So if you've got other groups, then you would be expecting that they police that they know who's coming in for their sessions or whatever, and so they will hold their details, and it will be very clear in line with GDPR why they're holding their details and why they'd be used, and then you would get rid of them in line with those procedures. So I think when we go away back to the beginning of this conversation, we talked about guidance, and so it's important to note that the guidance isn't just your route plans, as we said. You've got your guidance on GDPR, you've got your guidance on other things. I mean, I mentioned toilets earlier, but actually there's guidance on toilets, so you'll be able to refer to those things, and it's important that you just do that. So GDPR is the interesting one. Now, certainly in libraries, that's different because people will be able to walk in and out in terms of libraries. And so what we would be doing just now is we're just looking at a paper exercise where they fill in, and then we might change this, so don't quote me 100% yet. But actually, we're looking at just getting people to fill in a form, and then we put it in a box. And then if we need to open that, then we take it, and then after a few weeks, we get rid of that. So, but it will tell you the time that they came in order that we know if someone's been an outbreak, we know who's been in that day, and we can go back to them. So so it doesn't need to be overly difficult, but actually, if you've got your closed groups should have the information.
Yeah.
Also worth mentioning is that I think that for the groups that we're using or engaging with, it's probably, thankfully, more likely that you will get more accurate information, at least, because I think that when we talked, Melly and I, last week, we're saying perhaps you'd be less keen to give all your details to some guy in the pub, even if they, but we know that pubs now are doing the booking system because of that. So I think that we know that, you know, these kind of things will get tightened up. So I think the GDPR is one aspect of it, just around that kind of data, but you should be looking at GDPR policies as well in order to keep yourself right.
Okay, thanks folks, that's been really useful. I'm just conscious of the time now. I knew we could talk all day about this once we got onto the subject. I've got a couple of questions if I could just ask folk, and then we'll have a 5-minute break after that, if that's okay. I'm noticing that folk are asking about various things in the chat around checklists and different documents, and Melanie mentioned one. So those sorts of guidance and checklist things we'll share after the event. And if you've got any, let them, you know, send those to us as well. And the same around things like cleaning products or ideas that you think would be worth sharing with colleagues. If you can send those in, I put the email address in the chat, or pop them in the evaluation form, and we'll gather that all together. But just to ask Melanie and Alex a couple of questions. Somebody was asking about fire doors and high touch points. Is there any guidance about leaving those open, or do fire regulations override everything?
Yeah.
They do.
Still
Yeah.
fire regulations. And that's why when you're thinking about doing your walk round, you have to think about the flow and different things, but it doesn't mean that other measures are not still as important as they were before. And I think that goes back to making sure that you've been running your water and you've had your water checks done, because you could still have Legionella if you've not been doing any of this and your building's been closed for months and months and months. So your fire checks, your fire alarms, all of those things still remain.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Somebody was asking about how you're dealing with test and protect. So I guess that was what we were really meaning about the dealing with the contact details.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that did strike me when I was talking to Alex about this before was that it hadn't occurred to me about it's really important to know who's in together. So if you're doing it as the group, as Melanie said, that saves a lot of it. But if yours is more of a drop-in nature or something, you need to know who's around about at the same time. So if something happens, you know when that person is in and therefore who are the contacts. So I guess that was something just to add. Is there anything else that either of you think we need to mention about test and protect, or have we covered it?
No.
No, jolly good. Well, I can't believe it, but we're actually absolutely on time with where we wanted to be. So yeah, somebody else was asking about cleaning products, but I'm wondering whether, is that a quick answer or is that worth sharing later on?
All I was going to say is, I mean, I think that we're saying sanitizers, and I think I was just trying to look at it there. I think it's just the ones that get the high alcohol, but 70% minimum alcohol. But actually, I think we are underestimating soap and water. So if you've got staff or you've got volunteers and they've got access to soap and water, then actually we should be encouraging people to do that. So that's probably one that we tend to forget. We'll keep thinking about the sanitizers, but actually washing your hands at regular intervals is really, really important. Sally, we never really talked about volunteers and staff and
no, go on.
After the well-being side of things. So I don't know if you want to very quickly.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, you did mention quite a lot of it actually as you were going along, but I know you wanted to say about how some were worried and some were keen, so we could maybe just finish up with that. Yes.
Yeah, I think what we've certainly found is that you've got the whole spectrum. You've got people who are desperate to get back into work and they just want to see people again and feel normal again. And you've got the other end of that spectrum where you've got people who are really, really scared to come in and who are anxious about everything. And so certainly part of what we've done is had one-to-one meetings with people beforehand, making sure we understood all their situation, making sure that we could assist them where possible, looking at the travel arrangements, looking at whether they've got care arrangements, looking at what the best shifts for them could be, what's their flexibility, and just kind of trying to make sure that we've given them the right training and support so that when they do come back, that they're actually feeling really positive about doing it. So that pre-run, that visit to the building before it's open, and I can see Melanie nodding her head there, these are the kind of things that kind of just make people feel a bit more at ease. And as I said, you will have the whole spectrum there.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Anything either of you think we should add or finish up with before we have a break?
I was just going to add as well, just to say about the hand washing and things, having done the infection control course the other day, that is the main thing. So I'm sure there's probably a document that we can send out as well, which is your health and safety risk assessment pyramid. And COVID isn't just your normal health and safety issue. So the PPEs at the bottom, and then your risk assessment and guidelines, etc., is the next level up, and that is the level up that you're supposed to be focusing on. Just to add, if anyone is advertising that their cleaning products, sanitizer, anything else kills COVID, there's nothing been released to be able to then do the testing of products. So no one has been able to actually do any testing on it. So please don't fall prey again to someone that's selling something that kills off COVID. We were told the other day that definitely, yes, your washing with soap and water is far better than anything else. Then maybe a disinfectant, and then the sanitizer. So yeah, please don't invest in very, very expensive or specific COVID killing products that probably don't really exist.
Okay, thank you for that, Warren. And it's always sad that there's some sort of scam that comes along, isn't it, really? All right, well, I'm going to say a temporary thank you to Melanie and Alex, because I think that was really interesting, but we're going to hear from them again just at the very end for any follow-up questions. So what we'll do now is, in just a moment, stop for a sort of 5-minute break. And after the break, when you come back, you should see that there's a button on your screen or down at the very bottom that says join a breakout room. I've sort of allocated everybody to a breakout room, and there should be a facilitator, those folks that volunteered to be facilitators. Thank you very much. And what we've got is half an hour to have a bit of a discussion amongst yourselves in small groups. I think they're between 5 and 7 folk, to talk about the things that you find confident with at the moment, but more perhaps equally, well, at least equally importantly, is what things are you less confident about. Are there any areas you'd like some support and any burning questions? And we'll come back, we'll do that for half an hour, and then we'll come back at the very end. And I think we've got 10 or 15 minutes with Alex and Melanie at the very end. And I'll ask the facilitators if there's any burning issue or question, but we'll only have time for sort of one each per group. But anything else you can share with us afterwards. So if we can pop away now, if you'd like, for a sort of 5-minute break, and we'll come back at your leisure, and the groups can sort of start from about 10 past onwards. So thank you all very much. And will we give Alex and Melanie a bit of a hack back? Lovely, thank you. Hope that was a very useful chat. We had a little bit of a think while you were all away in the room. So what I'm going to do now is quickly whiz round each of the facilitators and ask if there's any sort of burning questions or burning issues that you want some support with. But there was just a couple of things that we realised between Melanie, Alex and myself that we hadn't mentioned. So we'll just sort of pop those in now, and then we'll go round to the groups. So Melanie, Alex, we were talking about masks for the public, weren't we? Did we want to say something about that?
Yeah, certainly some of the discussion we've been having is maybe just having a small amount of masks that could be made available, and whether you decide that people could make a donation for them, or depending on where you're located or the group or whatever, you might just want to give them out. But it was more about that genuinely some people might forget to bring something, and you don't want, you're trying to avoid any tension. And I think Melanie had mentioned earlier that you don't want staff having to get into a conflict situation. So if there's a way of getting around it and being helpful, then it's useful to do that. But the other side of that is there's costs involved, and therefore that might not always be applicable, which is why you might have your donation box.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. We realised we wanted to say something about having a recovery plan. I know Alex mentioned it, but being aware that you might have to go back a stage. We were talking about how things are changing in Northern England today if this happens. So we said something about being prepared for that, didn't we?
I think it was just the fact that although you might have to have a variety of different recovery plans, so the fact that you might have either someone that's found on site to be infected, so that's one level of recovery. What you do following that, whether it with a quarantine room, etc. If they're still on site, if they're not on site, then the contacting and how you deal with contacting all your different user groups or tenants or hirers or whatever, to the further stage of either a partial lockdown or reverting back to different stages of so we're in phase 3 at the moment, so we might not get to phase 4, we might go back to phase 2. So how would you deal with either going back to different phases of the lockdown or complete lockdown as well?
Yeah, okay, yeah, thank you. The 2 other points we had, you were talking, Melanie, about moving round and how if it's dance groups or groups that have to move, that makes a difference as to how many can come in.
Yes, so one of our dance groups has actually, I don't know how this is going to work, we were having a bit of a laugh about this, that they've actually bought small circle spots to put on the floor so that hopefully the kids will not move from their circle because they've got a special circle of their own. So that is one way that they're putting in their own measures to combat the fact of groups that are moving around. But I know through fitness instructor friends and things about different ways and measures that they're putting in place for still doing things, particularly down in England where the gyms have reopened, in that they can do certain things, but they can't do other types of classes, etc. So I guess it's, again, having that conversation, because as Alex was saying when we were chatting there, everyone's very keen to get back to doing things like normal, but there's not going to be the same normal as we were before. So it really is having that quite a frank conversation with people, because you will have people, sorry, my dog's running around in the background, that you will have people that are desperate to get back, and although they say, oh yeah, I've done this, I've done that, they might not, it might take a visit to the premises to make them realise exactly what is feasible and what's not feasible. And I think it's just people's expectations versus the reality of what they're able to do.
Yeah, and there's a good point, thank you, in the comment that Alan's noticing that, remember that 11-year-olds, of course, don't need to social distance now. So yeah, it's one of the examples, I guess, so that might help some of the children's groups. And the last point we wanted to mention was that Alex had got a kind offer, if it was of use to anybody, to go and view, have a visit to the premises, I think. So I don't know, did you want to say, Alex, or do you want me just to tell them?
Just if it's helpful, then I'm on annual leave next week, but after that, if you did want to have a walk round and maybe speak to someone who's been on the front line, because I'm not on the front line, so it's my teams that have been developing these recovery plans, then be happy to try and organise to maybe pop round, and then it means that you're speaking to someone who's actually been the person that's had to do it, rather than the person that's just talking about it.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. Yeah, and when I said, well, how are you going to manage that if lots of you would like to have a visit, Alex was mentioning that all of their buildings have been being opened up once a week for the water and so on, and there'd be one member of staff. So if one of you wanted to visit with one member of staff, that could be arranged. So okay.
Yeah, probably better for the buildings that are going to be open in those, so that you can see in all the detail that we've put in and the procedures. But depending on how many, we can organise something.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Right, if I can go round to the groups, because I'm conscious of the time now, I'll whiz round the facilitators. If you can keep it short though, with one burning question or one area that you think folk need some support. So Zara, can you now this is where it's tricky because I can't find you on the list. Just a minute to unmute you.
Okay, I'm gonna Alan's gonna ask our question because it's quite specific, so just unmute yourself, Alan.
Okay, thank you.
Hi there. So the question was for both, and it's just a little bit more around the thinking about cleaning and the delegation of cleaning to tenants and groups that are coming in just for a little while, and to what extent that was going to being imagined, because the conversation we had in the group was about imagining that the risk actually is to the next group coming in. So you have to have a lot of trust in the other tenants as well as the organisation that's running the building. Just obviously this is a difficult conversation. You can say anything else about how that went?
Okay, thank you.
If I come in first, I think it's a really important point. Right now, our buildings are not open to the public. So in terms of community facilities, they're open to the childcare providers that are operating from those buildings. Therefore, they have their own cleaning regimes, and that's been agreed between ourselves and them. I think that once that will be different once we end up with various groups coming in, and we would then need to update our risk assessments and our venue recovery plans to reflect that we've got more groups coming in and who's responsible for what then. So I think there's a difference between a leaseholder where they'll be there all the time and you can agree procedures, versus if you've got a dance group coming in, then after that it's another group and another group, then I would expect that you would have to do more from a staffing perspective to clean.
Okay, thank you. Melanie, do you want to add anything?
Just on the so the groups that I was speaking about, we've got one group that have a specific space with a cupboard and some storage equipment. So if you've got something like that, where thankfully they're the only group that have that space, But if you've got like a shared equipment storage, that's where you probably are going to have those difficult conversations with people, because things like equipment. So I don't know, if you've got childcare groups with toys and things like that, that is where the discussions need to be had on those things, and whether only certain groups get to use certain things, or you only have certain groups in at specific times or specific days. At the moment, we are only going to have probably one group in per day, just while we gradually begin to reopen, which will probably be September before those groups are back. So we are quite lucky in that. But I guess if you have a number of different groups coming in and using the same equipment, or the same accessing the same cupboards or spaces, that's where the cleaning does come down to whether it's your responsibility, or whether as the organisation, or whether that's the hirer, and depending on what sort of things. So for example, the orchestra that have that space, they're the only people that use that. We don't use that space, so we are going to have to, we are having that conversation with them at the moment about how many people access it. If it's only one person, if that person then does the cleaning down of the handles and the touch points, etc. So it's just about, I think, as Alex says, it's about having the conversations depending on whether it's a tenant or whether it's a user group.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. No easy answers, I think, really. Jennifer, can I see? I can't see everybody on the screen, but Jennifer, did you have something from your group?
Yeah, we did. So we were talking a lot about the guidelines and how to interpret guidelines, and obviously there's a lot of different services on offer across all of the different buildings, and a lot of the guidelines say to interpret kind of the way that you see best. There's quite a lot of nervousness around that. So there was just a question around whether there are any support services online, or whether there's a phone line or someone that you can phone to help you kind of interpret those guidelines and give you a bit more support on that, or whether that's something that's completely out of the question.
Ah, good question. I have a sneaking suspicion it might be about using your own judgment and peer support. But let's see what Melanie and Alex say.
I actually posted some links into, when you guys were out in the breakout rooms, from HSE. They, and I think it's ACAS as well, potentially, even if you're not unionised, have got the option to be able to email them or phone them for some help, but they will just give you guidance. They will not actually fill out a risk assessment for you or help you interpret the guidelines. So for example, I can understand why there's conflicting guidelines. We fall into a number of different areas. So as far as the phases of lockdown for each of our different areas, so for example, we've got a museum and gallery space which we could have opened on the 15th of July, but we're also a multi-use office building as well, so that can't open until today. It was the first time, and I still need to check on the guidance of whether anything changed yesterday. So yeah, it's about looking at everything and using, unfortunately, your best value judgment on where you go. And certainly the way that we are taking it is we are going to look at the one that falls furthest away and work to that schedule, so that we know that we're covered with all the other areas.
Okay, thank you. Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say I think it is really difficult for people out there, because you're looking for guidance specifically on your area of work, and the guidance doesn't cover every one of them. So I think it can be quite difficult. I think the main things for us are, when you're looking, a lot of the groups are going to end up being in phase 4 rather than phase 3. And I think some groups are trying to get themselves in phase 3, but actually they're really in phase 4. And so you might find that, I think I said earlier, you might have people saying, well, my office is there, I want to get in, but actually, as we've said, non-essential. And even yesterday, there was some changes around, indoor sports and saw play to reopen, but they've got dates for September. So I think that people are going to have to just keep referring back to the guidance that's out there, and double check. And we've already had a situation where there was an interpretation of the guidance, and then the Care Commission came back and said we need to double check with the Scottish Government. So I think everybody's feeling their way through it. But I would say that for lots of community groups and organisations, phase 4 will be the key rather than phase 3. But again, some of this could change, so it is quite difficult. So there's not one easy answer to it. Certain professions and sectors are developing their own guidance. Certainly from a library's perspective, we're involved in a core cities group across the UK and another one for Scotland. So there might be opportunities for certain sectors to get together so that you've agreed an interpretation of your own sector, and that might help everyone in that sector to build their own expertise.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for that. And I guess keeping in touch with colleagues locally that are in a similar situation can help with that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So what about Margaret? I'm trying to find Margaret. Can you unmute yourself? Oh, good. Thanks, Margaret.
Yeah, we discussed the questions, and I think the most one was discussed was how do they, you know, what they're not confident with. And I think it's just about the information sharing, like these meetings are good for that, and building confidence and getting where do they get the information for buildings. And then questions are being brought up as well today that we're you know, I suppose everybody's going to go away and have a look at and think about, like, say, the first aider or first aiders. Do they get training for this, and a room where you can put, you know, take someone to feel if they're ill, so that's all got to be thought of. So I think mental health, you know, how do you support folk with mental health, young people, how, you know. So I think there was like a question about the visors. Was it Julie you mentioned about the Swiss report, and it was to do with maybe visors have a lot of germs on them, so we're kind of not sure what's right, what's wrong, you know.
Okay.
What's safe.
So sharing of information, I think, is something we've all been thinking about. So we'll share some links from this, and we'll keep an eye out on how we can circulate information around ongoing. And I think the stuff around visors and health and safety information, where would folk look for that sort of stuff?
There's a link. I'm just trying to find it here. Hold on. I've got a couple of. So, in terms of the first aid, I'm just trying to find it.
Alex, don't worry, we can share it later.
Yeah, I'll find it and get it to you. But there is a link just around the whole first aid that we can share with you.
In terms of where folk could find training and
or find out more information. And it's more just about making sure that you've changed some of what's in there, but also there's some questions and ways of thinking about it which might be useful for folk.
Lovely.
I'll get that.
All right, thank you for that. Lovely, thank you, Margaret. Tracy, did you have something from your group?
Yeah, so overall, folk in the group were quite confident that their organisations will be compliant with what's required. So that was kind of what they were quite confident about. But concerns probably would be around staff and service users, how nervous people will be about coming back to spaces, and maybe is there any support out there available for I don't know, when speaking to staff or service users particularly, and helping them feel confident about coming back. And also, is there any training available sort of around COVID or around PPE? And that would be the question.
Okay, thank you. I think that was two that you snuck in there, but we'll try and be quick about that. We will pretend it's only one. So very quickly, is there anything we can say about training and training around PPE? That was something I'd wondered about too.
Yeah, I think there's some PPE training, but Glasgow Life have COVID programme that we've asked all staff to complete. So leave it with me to see if I can get that shared, then we'd be happy to do that. But it's just that I need to check that. But we've certainly we've got every member of staff needs to complete the COVID training.
Okay.
And then I think I'd said that part of what we were doing as well is a one-to-one kind of checklist, and just going through things with people, and it's more about conversations. And then what we found is by bringing people in taking them through things and walking them round, then we've noticed that that's made a difference. Because then you get that kind of, you feel a bit more confident, and then we'll just see how it goes. So I'm saying that just now because we're only very early stages, but so far people are feeling the feedback's been positive. But I'll see if I can get that shared, Sally, and if I can, then we'll get that out to you.
Oh, brilliant, Alex, thank you. And Melanie, you mentioned something that you'd done already, didn't you?
Yeah, I've done an infection control course, and you actually get a certificate for that through, and it was one of the colleges, I think it was Glasgow College. I'll certainly look that up and see. So it was an infection control nurse that took the course. Gary was on that, and I think, was Karen, were you on that as well? And no, it was Margaret, that's right. It was really good because it does actually go through things of, sorry, I pressed my space bar by accident. It goes through how to take your PPE, so masks and things and gloves, etc., off carefully, and also talks about how to not eradicate, but control the spread of infection, which if one person does, or you can have a number of people go, number of different team leaders go on, they can then train their teams up on it and pass that information on, and then that information could go in your guidelines and risk assessments, etc. as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm whizzing round. Did we cover both of your questions there? No, there was a sneaky extra one, wasn't there? What was the sneaky extra one? Oh, people were nervous. So Alex did cover that by talking to people individually and so on. Yeah, thank you. Kathleen, what about from your group?
A lot of the same issues. Overall theme is about certainty. People don't have a date. Some people would like a date. You can open on this date, but they also need to know about their funding, which those of you involved in the IGF to Communities Fund know. So know about. If you're not involved, you're not. But so yeah, the key issue for us is can we have more certainty? But we know what the timescale is for grants funds, but we don't know what the timescale is for reopening. And I just feel it's a period of great uncertainty.
Yeah, I think that's really common, I think, isn't it? So I guess all we can do is try and share information as quickly as we have it. And that's about all you can do with uncertainty. Before I go to Fran as the last group, I'm noticing that somebody was asking in the chat, what's our legal position and what's our legal liability? Somebody's asking their board want to know about that. And I'm thinking maybe they've got the same mindset with Kathleen's group, they're worrying about it. What's their legal liability? Is there any clear guidance on that? I'm guessing the answer is no.
The one thing I would say is please have a conversation before you reopen with your insurer, just to make sure things about your public liability insurance and what the situation is behind that. Our insurance was renewed in February, and it's actually got a clause in it that says that any pandemics will not be covered.
Ooh. Okay, very interesting. But
Sally,
other than that, yeah, go on.
So sorry, all I was going to say is, yeah, I think certainly for insurance purposes, part of what we had to do was, I think you mentioned we do weekly checks inside the buildings, but we do perimeter checks 3 times a week. So those kind of things were to make sure that we were in line with insurers. But also, I think as long as you, I would expect that in terms of your insurer, they'll be expecting you to have very clear guidance, to have your risk assessments done, to be able to demonstrate that you've mitigated as much risk as you possibly can in this situation. So, and I think that as long as you've got all of that, and your insurer should be reasonably pleased that you've done that.
Brilliant, thank you. So some guidance there, really important around the insurer, I think, and so on. Okay, the very last group, because we're just about 4 o'clock. So Fran, what was there from your group?
Hi, so our group was a kind of mix of people who were waiting for spaces to open as well as opening spaces. So much of the conversation we had was about people management, managing people's anxieties, staff who maybe previously were shielding and are now having to come straight back to work, getting transport to and from work if you're not a driver, and for anxieties for like service users coming in to the centre, and how those are being managed, and how you're building confidence in that respect.
Okay, thank you.
Better supervision kind of thing for staff.
So I guess what we've talked about already in terms of having individual interviews with folk, looking at individual circumstances would help. And was there anything else around the people management side of it that we haven't covered? Alex?
I was just going to add that there's something called WorkBoss. If you get in touch with them, they're doing free surveys that you can use to send out, which are anonymous. They will collate the information for you, and so we're sending it to volunteers and staff, and you can do it 2 or 3 times, I think, and they will then collate the information for you. So people might feel it's easier to talk about how they feel in an anonymous survey rather than speaking to a team leader or another colleague. So it just anonymizes it as far as how people are feeling. But if you want to, I guess if you're wanting to get more direct feedback, it's probably better to speak to the individuals themselves.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think we've come to the end, and I'm not going to sort of say, is there anybody that wants any further questions, because we've just gone 4 o'clock. But what I will say is if you do have other questions, I've just shared the link to the evaluation form. So if before you exit, you click on that, it should take you to an evaluation form. And if you can tell us about how you feel today has gone, and in the box where it asks you for any other comments, if there's anything else you'd like to know or you'd like to share, please pop it in there. Meantime, I'd say thank you very much to everybody, and especially to Alex and Melanie. It's not easy to come and say, yeah, I'll talk to you about our experience. And I think you'll agree with me, they've been really knowledgeable and really open with us about their own experience. So will we give them a round of applause? Although they can't hear it. Oh yeah, thank you very much.